All right, so when we're talking about trigonometric functions and we're talking about the unit circle, there are what are called special angles on the unit circle. And those correspond to, as an example, here we got 30, 45, 60, or if they're expressed in radians, it's pi over 6, pi over 4, pi over 3. And that continues all the way around on the unit circle. In other words, here you got 120, 135, 150. Here up here you got 90 or pi over 2, and over here at 180, also at pi. And if you'll notice, the x and y coordinates, or the cosine and sine, cosine being the x coordinate on the unit circle, sine being the y coordinate on the unit circle, their values are similar depending upon that degree measurement or radian measurement. So for instance, when we're looking at 45 degrees or pi over 4, we see that the cosine is the square root of 2 over 2, and the sine is also the square root of 2 over 2. Now go over here to the 135 degrees, which is also the reference angle here is a 45-degree angle. The cosine is negative square root of 2 over 2, and the sine is positive square root of 2 over 2. That's 3 pi over 4, 135 degrees. Or at 225 degrees, or 5 pi over 4, they're both negative. Both the cosine and the sine are both negative square root of 2 over 2. And lastly, since we're sticking with the kind of the 45-degree reference angle measurements, at 315 and 7 pi over 4, the cosine is positive square root of 2 over 2, and the sine is negative square root of 2 over 2, which kind of brings us to this all students take calculus model, which means that all of the trigonometric functions on the unit circle in the first quadrant are going to be positive. The sine function in the second quadrant is going to be positive. Sine and the cosecant trig functions will be positive. In the third quadrant, the tangent functions, tangent and cotangent, will be positive, but that's because both the cosine and the sine are negative. And then in the fourth quadrant, the cosine and the secant functions are positive, but the sine functions are negative. Over time, and many people will encourage you to remember these coordinates based on where they lie on the unit circle. But short of memorizing it, one thing you definitely want to do is keep a copy of the unit circle handy, and you have one that have been distributed out to the handouts in your student notebooks. So let's see, here we're being asked to find the value of negative 3 pi over 4, the cosine value of negative 3 pi over 4. Now if we're talking about a negative angle, that means we're going clockwise around the circle. So we're coming from the origin, or where the value is 0 degrees or 2 pi, and we're coming from the going in a clockwise direction, and so that would mean that if we're coming here, that would be pi over 2. So negative 3 pi over 4 would be the same as the positive 5 pi over 4. If we were going positive, we'd be going around to that location, but we got a negative angle. And so the cosine value on the unit circle for negative 3 pi over 4 is negative square root of 2 over 2. Now, what about the sine of 420? Well, one trip around the circle is 360 degrees. And that would mean, so I got 420 minus 360, so I got 60 degrees more to go, which means I'd be right up there. And the sine value there at 60 degrees is the square root of 3 over 2. So when we're evaluating these trig expressions for special angles, keep that unit circle handy. Only real trick in it is figuring out your negative angles, and that's not that difficult if you just keep your head about you and be patient. Okay? Very well.